Shabbat Shalom. I have made lots of promises over my time. Leaders of the congregation have said, Rabbi, don't talk so much about Star Trek. Don't talk about Star Wars, Marvel Comics. Rabbi, what are all of these crazy obsessions? And my latest crazy obsession, I don't know if it's crazy, but it's certainly an obsession, has been English Premier League football. Some of you call it soccer, but some of us call it football. Even Mindy is like looking through her hands. She can't believe how can Rabbi Bernholtz possibly make every word of Torah about Chelsea Football Club. Go Blues. Finally, Saul is here. Saul Bronstein, who joined our congregation in the midst of the pandemic, I don't think has ever been here on a Friday night, and it just so happens that's what I talk about. He's a big Chelsea fan as well. But I'm not talking about the football, and I'm not necessarily talking about Chelsea. But what I do share with you tonight did come as I was watching the Chelsea game last week. Because I saw them, and there they were on the field against Newcastle United, and I noticed that there was a splotch of red on the football uniform, on the kit of the Newcastle team. I'm like, oh, okay, I hadn't ever seen that before. And then I noticed the same red splotch in the middle of the Chelsea uniform. I'm like, what is going on? And you see highlights of other games. Every player in the English Premier League had a red splotch, a little red splotch with a black center on it. I'm like, what is that? It's the strangest looking thing in the middle of the uniform on their soccer jerseys. It was so strange. So I did what every self-respecting, curious person does. I Googled it. And I said, red splotch, European football, or English Premier League soccer kits. And I got an interesting answer. Does anyone know what it is? I'll give you a hint. It's November. It's early November, and this is English Premier League. Did you figure it out?
The 5th of November.
It is not the 5th of November. Charlie. Got it. And so what's the red splotch? What are the red splotches? The Red Poppies. They are the... So many of you might be familiar with, there is the use of poppies. There's a beautiful poem by John McCrae called In Flanders Fields, makes reference to the poppies. And this goes back to very early in the history of the remembrance, the honoring of those who died during World War I. And the red poppies have become a huge symbol throughout Europe, especially in England, as a way of raising money to help families of people who died in World War I, and also for helping people who were injured in World War I. There even had been at one point the artificial poppies were being made at a factory that was actually being run entirely by servicemen who had been wounded during World War I. And so these poppies are really pretty incredible. The whole practice of calling attention with the poppies to World War I and those who died in World War I, and the challenge of what war is. That there are moments where you've got to stand up to tyranny, but ultimately war ends up just destroying the world and destroying lives. And those red poppies are a reminder of the destruction of war. In Flanders Fields is talking about a field, a battlefield, and what grows after it is only the red poppies. It's a reminder of the blood that's been spilled and the just destruction of the landscape, and that's what grew. And so here are these English Premier Leagues in the beginning of November with on their soccer jersey with the red poppies, and then eventually their jerseys will be auctioned off as a way of raising money, again, to support veterans' causes. Here is this very visible symbol And like so many Jewish symbols that we use, what had happened? I Googled it, I looked for it, it caught my attention. I said, what is this? It raised my awareness of how I move through the world. It's really a pretty simple and powerful symbol to use to catch our attention in our day and age. But in the last few weeks, as I was seeing that come forward, there was another symbol that caught my attention. There are other acts of memory that are coming up. And it wasn't just World War I. What's coming up in these coming weeks? We just passed the yard site for the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. And there were lots of different articles for that. And then earlier this week, Burl was kind enough, and Joel Berman sent to me some of the different responses, actions we can take as part of the memory, because here we are approaching Kristallnacht. Even as we get ready for Veterans Day in response to World War I, we are also right at the yard site for Kristallnacht, that night of broken glass, of what happened in Germany in 1938. When the Germans had a pogrom, the Nazis started a pogrom that was the real beginning of the Holocaust. And so in addition to that poppy catching my attention, a different kind of the same action, but in a very different way, but that same, how do you say that you're present? How do you say, I don't know if it's protest, I'm standing up and I am doing an action. I am acknowledging that day. I'm acknowledging that value. I am acknowledging that experience. And what Joel sent to me and to Burl, and then Burl asked, is this something we can do, is something that actually came out of the March of the Living program. A beautiful program that takes young people and now adults to go to different camps over in Europe to give them a sense of what it was like in Europe during World War II, during the Shoah, and then going eventually to Israel as well. And this International March of the Living, supported by lots of different organizations and institutions and congregations, has said on that night of Kristallnacht, on that yard site, everybody leave one light on. In that night, darkness ruled because the Nazis said, everybody keep quiet while we do this. Fire engines stay in, emergency people stay in, everybody stay off the street so we can do this to the Jews, and that's part of the way that it happened. And so part of the protest or action or act of presence is on that night in your house, in your synagogue, in your friend, leave a light on. Take that moment to catch your attention, to think about, wait a second, this is the anniversary of Kristallnacht. How am I moving through the world? And how do I do something, an action to catch my attention, to change how I move? I share that with you, and it's powerful, it's beautiful. I've been thinking as I've been preparing for this, like, what light do we leave on in our sanctuary, right? Is a light that wastes a lot of energy? Is a light that somehow you can see from the street? There aren't a lot of lights that you can leave on in the street. How many calls am I going to get from people? Although, wouldn't that be great, right? If I leave a light on in the social hall, and we get lots of calls from our neighbors saying, well, there's a light on in your sanctuary, is everything okay? And then you get the opportunity to say, no, this is the anniversary of Kristallnacht. We still live in a world where there's lots of anti-Semitism and senseless hatred in our world. These are two incredible outward signs that the world is not whole and complete. And how do we learn from the tragedies, not just the tragedies, the acts of violence, the acts of senseless hatred, the acts of tyranny in our past, to change what's happening in our present. But I also know that wearing a poppy or turning on the lights is not going to fix all of the brokenness in our world. I would even venture to say, I don't even think those acts are actually going to fix any brokenness in our world. No act of senseless hatred is actually going to stop if a soccer player is wearing a poppy on his jersey. And no senseless act of hatred or violence in our world if I leave a light on. But I don't think this is about tikkun. In this month of November, as we're starting this month of Kislev, these two acts are a call. They're a reminder. They're an acknowledgement. It's like Noah. Where did Noah build the ark? Did he build it in the wilderness away from everybody? No. He built it in the center of town. When Jonah had to call out to the people of Nineveh, did he go and post a sign outside the city? Did he walk around the walls of the city? No, he went through the center of the city, stopping in different places, calling out and saying, hey, something's wrong. We've got to do this. When Esther, in the story of Purim, when she said, I've got to stand up, she didn't just sit up in her, she sent word out that Esther is now fasting because there's something bad happening and we have to do something to stop it. When Moses, think about Moses, he goes to Pharaoh and he says, let my people go. He doesn't send a letter. He doesn't stand out in the wilderness shaking his hands. He goes to Pharaoh. These are what those poppies represent, and that light represents calling out to ourselves and calling out to all those around us that something has got to happen. That we have to find ways to work together, to work with kavanah, with intention. That we've got to show outward signs to ourselves and find others that we can be part of doing it, that we in this world, not to fix everything, but we can do it better. Two images that I share with you. One is trudge mode. You might have heard me mention trudge mode. I was walking up Masada. This is one of our second to last trip to Israel. And I was with one of the members of our congregation, and she said, I'm really tired. I don't think I can make it. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? We're going to make it. We're just going to use trudge mode. Right? Do you know what trudge mode is? You just put one foot in front of the other and you talk about ice cream. That's what a little of this is, not the talking about ice cream, but it's trudge mode. It might just be one little step and then another little step. But it's realizing if we keep finding those ways, whether it's a poppy, whether it's a light, whether it's sharing a little story, if we find each one of those is a little step, and that will move us forward. And the other, as I was looking down, caught my attention, one of the art sites tonight for Ray Rabner, a member of our congregation, passed away many years ago. And some of you might remember Ray, and some of you might not. Ray did something very interesting. He loved plants and horticulture, and he was the one that said, Rabbi, you can grow etrogs. All you have to do is take the seeds out, and we'll grow some etrog trees. And I will tell you to this day, not a single one of the etrog trees that Ray planted is still alive on this campus. But there's also something different in that. There are etrog trees on this campus. Why? Because Ray planted the first one. I saw how he did it, and then I now do it, and I've taught our kids in our congregation to do it. And so one person's effort might not change everything, but you don't realize, just like I said with somebody calling and telling us the lights are on in the social hall, you never know. When you do that act, it might not take you all the way to the moon, but that one little act can carry a little bit of the way that then inspires someone else or teaches someone else or connects with someone else that then brings shalom into our world. This is the month of Kislev. This is the month of November. There are powerful yard sites from Veterans Day to Kristallnacht, powerful observances this week. Some of you might put on a poppy or go to a Veterans Day program. Some of you might leave your light on that night of broken glass. But may all of us find those ways, whether it's these yard sites, or many other moments of observance, find outward ways of bringing the best of ourselves, the best of our world, of being able to acknowledge when there is brokenness in the world and what we can do, each in our own little way, to take a step forward in our world. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.